calls where the cop will mirror the person in stress.
Really?
He'll mirror his or her behavior.
I'm sure that works very well.
And it just makes it worse. And then you can't wait for like another cop to come in who's a little bit calmer and more rational to kind of separate the cop from the person you're there to help.
Yeah.
So I can see in that situation a social worker would work.
And the idea is that the cop who's shouting down, trying to shout down the person who's is in distress, he's escalating it, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to assert his dominance.
That never works. It never works.
I keep saying him. There are probably a lot of female cops who do the same thing, but that is what they do, right? They're trying to assert the dominance. They're trying to get people to comply,
and that's where advocates for social workers taking over certain calls where cops aren't necessarily needed comes to play. And I think it's a great resource to have on a call like that.
How about this, though, Kassandra? How much street experience do you have?
I mean, if I can speak for myself, I would say, I worked for DCF, Department of Children and Families, for over 10 years. And I don't want to say it's similar work to police, but we investigated child abuse and neglect. And a lot of the times we dealt with the police, we dealt with the court system. So personally, I feel that I have experience in that, but I don't want to say that's the same for all social workers. And I think if you were to have someone in that role, you really would need to ensure they have the appropriate background and training in that setting of working in law enforcement as a social worker, and what that would look like for them, and what, how to handle those type of situations.
Okay. Let's move to Cahoots. You want to tell me about Cahoots?
Oh, Cahoots. That's a program. It's in Oregon. It's been around for like over 30 years. It's crisis assistance helping out on the streets. And basically all that is it's more social workers independently without even cops being there. They'll call a 911 dispatcher, and the dispatcher will decipher that, hey, it's just a 12-year-old kid, doesn't want to go to school, 12-year-old kid off his meds, acting a little irrational, no weapons involved, no threats. So instead of sending a cop who potentially could escalate the situation, because I've been to calls where you deal with a young kid and the young kid doesn't like cops because a week before the young kid saw his father get arrested and pepper sprayed by the cops. So now you're sending the cops to the house, and that calm kid escalates the minute he sees the cop. So programs like Cahoots. I think those are great programs, and they have a lot of good press, and there's a lot of good research that they work on certain situations.
Right.
Specifically just social workers showing up.
Figuring out. Well, all right. So let me ask you this question. This is from, what did you do? You found this on Chief Smith's blog?
Who's Chief Smith?
I don't know. It says from Chief Smith's blog here.
Yeah.
All right. So you found, this is a blog by a Chief Smith?
Yeah, some chief. I don't know if he's an Indian chief or a police chief, but he's a chief.
He's a police chief. But this is pretty bad news. 2 social workers have been killed in the line of duty, and this is obviously a while ago.
Yeah, that's the counter to this. I mean, what happens when a call escalates? Mental health calls can escalate very quickly within seconds.
Yeah,
and it can go from a calm, compliant person to a completely irrational, violent person. And if they're in their own house, in the kitchen area, there's weapons there.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? And it happens. Social workers have been killed. They've been on calls with police. Social workers have been killed on calls with other social workers. I think the social worker death rate, if you want to refer to it, is 1 in 100,000, whereas cops is like 5 in 100,000.
Okay.
So they got a pretty good chance of survival, Dave. That's a good point.
Well, this case that he cites is horrible, and a 17-year-old attacked his mental health social worker with a knife and a chainsaw during a home visit back in 2004. She died at the scene. I think I told you this story before, but I had a cop tell me once that he was trying to de-escalate a situation with a mental health issue through a door, and he got the guy to come outside and all that, and then he went into the apartment. And there where the guy was behind the door was a sword.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that's a really good example of that person who was mentally ill. If he's got the sword, he might have used the sword. And are you better off with a police officer who is going to react maybe more quickly to a physical situation versus a social worker who's maybe won't.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to, obviously, if social workers want to do this job, it's going to be like a volunteer thing. And whoever would choose these people, they'd have to be, emotionally and physically able to deal with what's going to happen on the street. And also understand that you're in a cop's world. You're dealing with people in their worst. A lot of times a social worker or a counselor will deal with a person a day after they were out of their mind, off their meds, and now they're a lot calmer, and they've been given some meds to calm down, and
the arrest has happened.
Everything's all the trauma is all over, and then now they're sitting in a chair and you're speaking to them. But I think it's a good program. I think potentially it could work if you have the right mix of the right police officer matched up with the right social worker. Because a police officer who doesn't buy into the program is only going to cause problems for the social worker. Well, it's going to be counterproductive.
And here's one. Will the cops don't trust anybody. Will they trust the social worker to keep quiet about anything they say that might be considered, I don't know, a little rough around the edges, let's say?
Yeah, there's a difference between being a cop out there committing constitutional violations and criminal acts. We wouldn't ask any social worker to cover for a guy like that. But if a cop,
let's say
give me an example, Dave.
I'll give you an example. What's a good way to say it? I knew a cop who used really bad language in reference to minorities.
Okay.
So you've got a cop and he's talking to everybody's a this and a that and a this and a that, and he's riding with a social worker. Are you saying you just wouldn't put this cop with a social worker?
Police departments typically pick the appropriate person to deal with social workers. The police department I work for, there's 2 or 3 guys that are in that unit, and they are the right personality type to deal with a social worker in their cruiser on their shift 8 hours a day. They would not put that type of a police officer with a social worker.
So you're saying you get a Cro-Magnon, he or she is going to ride somewhere else?
Yeah, a 1940s-esque police officer wouldn't be the one they would choose.
Let me ask you this question. Are the 1940s-esque police officers, are they the old... Somebody once said to me, you don't have to be an old priest to be an old priest. You don't have to be a young priest to be a young priest. Are the old cops the Cro-Magnons and the young cops?
There's not a lot of old cops anymore. There's a lot of young. Yeah.
All right. So
I think every cop is individual. They all have their own personality. They bring their own dynamic to the table. And as long as whoever's in charge of that police department hiring police officers and then matching them up with a social worker, they better know their officers and match the right ones up. Because it could be a program that can be very productive, or it can just tarnish the reputation of the cops even more than it's been tarnished in the last few years.
If that's possible.
It can make it worse. I don't think it's possible, but it could.
All right, let me ask you 2 more questions. Kassandra, this is for you. Do you carry a gun?
No.
Should you carry a gun if let's say, putting yourself in the position of riding along with a cop, I would think you'd need... Well, I don't know. I was going to say I think you'd need one to keep the cop in line, but that's I'm just kidding about that. But I guess this kind of leads to the next question. First of all, should the social worker who's riding with the cop have weapons training and be armed?
I would say no to being armed, but maybe some training in safety and defense in some way.
All right. Well, let's say this. This gets my second question. Let's say you're in this program. You're riding along with Dale, all right, just back when he was young and he knew how to be a police officer, not now when he's old and frail. But so you go out and you go to a call, things go sideways. You see Dale surrounded by young toughs. And do you assist him as a social worker, or do you just lock the doors of the cruiser and say, good luck, Dale?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It is a tough one. I mean, it's something to think about because, first of all, you don't want to put the social worker into danger because they're a civilian. Do they help you where it might lead to injury for them? And Kassandra, in this case, might be better off staying in the cruiser and just watching you get the tar wheeled out of you.
There you go. Wouldn't be the first time, Dave. Yeah, I think in regards to wrap it up, I think in regards to arming a social worker, I would say no, because that's just another weapon on scene. If for some reason we roll up to a scene, it's me armed, the social worker's armed for whatever reason, and we're dealing with 3 or 4 kids and they start fighting with the social worker, they don't happen to have a weapon on them, but they grab her weapon, that's not a good thing. Because
Right.
when cops go to any call, there's always one weapon on scene. It's the cop bringing it. Yeah. So, but to teach them how to use a weapon in the event, let's say the officer was disabled, incapacitated, and she's, in a house and she's in a room and you get 3 crazy nuts trying to get her. If she knew how to use a weapon, like the officer's weapon, that would probably save her life. But then again, she would have to commit to that lifestyle because not everyone believes in weapons. So you'd have to have a social worker that would say, yeah, we're going to teach you how to use a weapon. You're not going to carry one. We're going to teach you how to use pepper spray. You're not going to carry it, but we're going to teach you how to use it in the event everything goes bad. Then the only way for you to survive is to grab one of those weapons to protect yourself.
Kassandra, thanks for joining us. Anything to add to that?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
You can put me down as a reference, Kassandra, if you want to work for a local police department. I think you'd be fine.
Yeah. If you want to just say we did pretend ride-alongs in his head. This has been Inside the Thin Blue Line. I'm Dave Rattigan with Dale Lawrence and social worker Kassandra Garcia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.